Okay, so what we are going to do firstly, Henry, welcome everyone to our weekly session titled Latest in Bitcoin Tech, where we go through the Bitcoin Optech newsletter and discuss the latest evolutions in the world of Bitcoin tech. Uh, this week, I have planned to club two newsletters. Usually, what we do is we pick up one newsletter, the latest one, and we go through it. But this week, I've decided to pick up two newsletters because we were trailing, and because before I went through the newsletter 345, 346 was already released. And also next week, we might not have a session because there's an event going on, and I expect most regular Bitcoiners of the community to be engaged with that event, or maybe they might be traveling back home. So or we might not have a session next week. So what we can do is we can club these two newsletters, newsletter number 345 and newsletter number 346. We can pick and choose a couple of topics from each of the newsletters and consume them tonight. So we'll start with the latest one, the newsletter number 346. We'll go through it. We'll go through the first one, the first news article. I think it has only one news article. Let's read the preface first. This week's newsletter summarizes a discussion about LND's updated dynamic fee rate adjustment system. Also included are our regular sections describing recent changes to services and client software, announcing new releases and release candidates, and summarizing recent mergers to popular Bitcoin infrastructure. As every week, this week's newsletter begins with a news article. The title being "Discussion of LND's Dynamic Fee Rate Adjustment System." Let's see what this is. Let's first read the article, and then we'll delve into the post itself and try and cover a couple of relevant subtopics that this news article relies on. Matt Morehouse posted to Delving Bitcoin a description of LND's recently rewritten sweeper system, which determines the fee rates to use for on-chain transactions, including RBF fee bumps. He begins with a brief description of the safety-critical aspects of fee management for an LN node, as well as the natural desire to avoid overpaying. He then describes the two general strategies used by LND: querying external fee rate estimators such as local Bitcoin Core node or a third party. This is mainly used for choosing initial fee rates and fee bumping non-urgent transactions. Exponential fee bumping used when a deadline is approaching to ensure that problems with a node's mempool or its fee estimation don't prevent timely confirmation. For example, Eclair uses exponential fee bumping when deadlines are within 6 blocks. So before we read this further, let's just try and understand what we've read so far. So basically, this post talks about dynamic fee rate adjustment, and we have talked about this on multiple occasions in various different sessions. We know that the Lightning Network relies on pre-signed transactions. And when you pre-sign a transaction, it's pretty difficult for you to determine the fee because the fee market is dynamic. So when you sign a commitment transaction on the Lightning Network, it is pretty difficult for you to accurately predict what the fee market will look like when you broadcast that commitment transaction to the mainnet. And that is why the thumb rule is that most people, when they sign a commitment transaction, they stipulate a nominal confirmation fee or a mining fee. They stipulate a nominal mining fee. And when they have to broadcast the transaction, if the fee market is in accordance with the nominal fee that they have stipulated, well and good. But if it's not, then they bump the fee. And there are different mechanisms to do that. RBF could be one of them. CPFP could be one of them. CPFP again has different mechanisms in which you can do that, right? So we've discussed all of that previously. That the Lightning Network depends on pre-signed transactions, and in pre-signed transactions, it's pretty difficult for you to accurately predict what the fee market will look like when you actually broadcast those pre-signed transactions. And that is why usually you need to RBF or CPFP or use other mechanisms to bump the fee such that the fee that you have allocated for the confirmation of your commitment transaction is in accordance with the fee market. Now, to do that, different Lightning implementations deploy different tactics. One of which is mentioned here: how querying external fee rate estimators such as a local Bitcoin Core node or a third party. This is mainly used for choosing initial fee rates and fee bumping non-urgent transactions. So you need a mechanism to bump the fee. You need a mechanism to bump the fee. Like by what extent do you have to bump a fee? So when I have a channel, when Alice and Bob have a Lightning channel and they sign a commitment transaction, and they stipulate a nominal fee for that commitment transaction. When they want to actually broadcast that transaction, how can they determine, how can they find out by what extent do they have to bump the fee? Because initially the fee is nominal. Now we need to bump the fee. To what extent do we need to bump the fee to ensure timely confirmation of that transaction? One way of determining adequate fee for confirmation of these pre-signed transactions on the Lightning Network is via using or querying external fee rate estimators. Like your Lightning node can be in touch with a Bitcoin core node, for example, and that core node has an inbuilt fee rate estimator. That Bitcoin core node determines the fee rate and lets your Lightning channel know about that fee rate. And in accordance, the fee of the pre-signed transaction is bumped. You need to specify the confirmation target. Like if any of you have gone through and understand how fee rates are estimated, then there is a variable known as a confirmation target. So if you want your transaction to get mined within the next 10 blocks, then your confirmation target is 10 blocks. So your fee rate estimator will keep your confirmation target in sight and use that as a parameter to determine what fee you have to pay. So, for instance, if you want your transaction to get mined in 10 blocks, your confirmation target is 10. So, a fee will be predicted for timely confirmation of your transaction within 10 blocks. If you want it to get confirmed in 20 blocks, then your confirmation target is 20. So, a fee will be calculated in accordance such that your transaction gets timely confirmation within 20 blocks. So your Lightning node can query an external third party. It could be a Bitcoin Core node. It could also be a third party, like for instance, a mempool dot space, a fee rate calculator or something like that. And your node will convey to that third party or that fee rate estimator your confirmation target. And based on your confirmation target, in how many blocks do you want that pre-signed transaction to get confirmed, your fee rate estimator will estimate a fee such that your commitment transaction has to be bumped with that fee to ensure timely confirmation. And this becomes even more critical in pre-signed transactions on the Lightning Network because we know that pre-signed transactions on the Lightning Network are time sensitive. They are time locked. So you need to ensure that your commitment transactions need to get mined and confirmed on the blockchain before the time lock expires. So your node will query a third party, a fee rate estimator, and let them know by when your transaction will expire. And that will be used as a parameter, as a confirmation target, and the fee rate estimator will stipulate a fee in accordance with that. So this is one mechanism of estimating the extent of fee bumping in pre-signed transactions. That is by querying external fee rate estimators. The second is exponential fee bumping, which is used when a deadline is approaching to ensure that problems with the node's mempool or its fee estimation don't prevent timely confirmation. For example, Ether uses exponential fee bumping when deadlines are within 6 blocks. Now, different Bitcoin clients might have different mechanisms and algorithms to calculate their fee. Likewise, different mempool explorers might have different mechanism and different algorithms that they use to calculate the mining fee. Some of them might not be very accurate. Like there was a criticism regarding Bitcoin Core's fee rate estimator that it always, the user almost always ends up overpaying. So there was a criticism which was pretty known about Bitcoin Core's fee rate estimator until lately that Bitcoin Core usually makes the users overpay. So, different clients might have a different algorithms that they use to calculate fee rates, and it might not suit your need. So another mechanism is exponential fee bumping. What's exponential fee bumping? Initially, a small amount of fee is stipulated. It could be the minimum relay fee, and then slowly and gradually, as the confirmation time is coming closer, your fee will get increased. So, for instance, if you have stipulated initially X sats that you're willing to pay to get your commitment transaction on the Lightning channel confirmed on the mainnet, and you tried broadcasting your commitment transaction with X sats of fee, and your transaction did not get confirmed, and now the because it's a time lock contract, the time is ticking. So what you can do is you can increase it by a prefixed value. Let's say if initially it was 2 sats, then you add 2 more sats to it and 4 sats, and you try again. And if that doesn't work, then you add 2 sats again, for instance. Then becomes 6 sats, and you broadcast again. If it still doesn't work, you add 2 sats more, and it becomes 8 sats, right? So you can exponentially keep on increasing. It could be linear or it could be in any proportion. I'm just throwing abstract numbers at you, right? So The gist of what we've covered this thus far is that uh, in the Lightning Network, the transactions are pre-signed, and when the transactions are pre-signed, it is difficult for you to estimate exactly what fee will get the transaction confirmed, because you're not broadcasting the transaction immediately after signing them. Rather, you might sign them and just update the status and not broadcast them immediately. So usually the thumb rule is that the participants on the Lightning Network, when they sign a commitment transaction, they stipulate a nominal fee, and when they actually want to broadcast the transaction, they bump that fee. Now, how do they bump that fee? How do they estimate to what extent the fee needs to be bumped to get the transaction confirmed on the blockchain? There are two mechanisms that are enlisted here in this article. One is querying external fee rate estimators. So your Lightning node can query third-party fee rate estimators like a Bitcoin client or maybe a mempool explorer and ask them what would be an adequate fee to pay to ensure that your transaction gets confirmed in X number of blocks. So because these transactions are time sensitive, you know exactly when these transactions are going to expire, they're time locked. So you use that time lock height in terms of block as your confirmation target, and you pass all of this information to a third party fee rate estimator, and they will stipulate a fee that is adequate in accordance with them for you to ensure timely confirmation of your commitment transaction. That's one way. The second way is exponential fee bumping, where you don't query any third party fee rate estimator. Rather, you yourself first stipulate a nominal amount of fee. That could be the minimum relay fee, and you relay your commitment transaction. If the transaction gets confirmed, well and good. If it doesn't get confirmed, then you keep on incrementing it. So initially, let's say you tried with 2 sats, it didn't work. Then you try with 4 sats, you try with 6 sats, you try with 8 sats. You just keep on adding 2 sats, for example, till you reach a stage where your transaction gets included in the block and gets mined. So these are two ways in which the Lightning clients stipulate fee to determine the extent by which the fee has to be bumped. Right now, we'll move forward. Matt Morehouse then describes how these two strategies are combined in LND's new sweeper system. HTLC claims with matching deadlines are aggregated into a single batch transaction. The budget for the batch transaction is calculated as the sum of the budgets for the individual HTLCs in the transaction. Based on the transaction budget and deadline, a fee function is computed that determines how much of the budget is spent as the deadline approaches. By default, a linear fee function is used, which starts at a low fee determined by the minimum relay fee rate or an external estimator and ends with the total budget being allocated to fees when the deadline is one block away. So we just now covered how how Lightning clients estimate the fee that is required for bumping the a fee of the pre-signed transactions. They either query third-party fee rate estimators or they exponentially keep on incrementing the fee till they are sure that the transaction will now get confirmed. Uh, Now, LND or this developer Matt Morehouse has proposed uh, or has mentioned how LND sweeper system, okay, they've named it sweeper, how LND sweeper system incorporates and aggregates both of these mechanisms, right? Querying external fee rate estimators as well as exponential bumping. We'll just read through this highlighted passage once again slowly and try and understand it better. So HTLC claims with matching deadlines are aggregated into a single batch transaction. Now we know that in a Lightning channel there might be multiple pending HTLCs. It's not necessary that when you broadcast your commitment transaction, you have only one pending HTLC. You might have multiple pending HTLCs, so you batch all of them. Okay, what does LND's sweeper mechanism do? Sweeper fee estimation mechanism do? It batches all the pending HTLCs. The budget for the batch transaction is calculated as the sum of the budgets for the individual HTLCs in the transaction, right? So the budget, the fee budget that you have allocated for each HTLC, it's clubbed, it's batched along with the transactions, and that's the cumulative budget to ensure the confirmation of all the batched HTLCs based on the transaction budget and deadline. So you have a budget to pay the fee now. Okay, your fee rate estimator knows that this is the budget that you are willing to allocate to paying the fee to ensure the timely confirmation of all HTLCs, all pending HTLCs on your Lightning channel, and a deadline. Your deadline is obviously inferred from the time lock. So the HTLC, as the name suggests, hash time lock contracts. So you know what the confirmation target is. You infer it from your time lock, and you know what the transaction budget is. You infer it by aggregating or summing up the budget of each individual HTLC. So now you batch all the pending HTLCs, you batch the entire budget. So you now have the budget, you now know the budget for the confirmation of all of those pending HTLCs, and you also now know what's the confirmation target. Based on the transaction budget and deadline, a fee function is computed that determines how much of the budget is spent as the deadline approaches, right? So there's a fee function. It will take as the input your fee budget and your confirmation deadline, and it will calculate what amount of fee needs to be spent from your fee budget to ensure timely confirmation of your time lock contracts. So let's say if you have allocated N sats, N as in New York, okay, the alphabet N. Let's assume that you have allocated N sats of budget for timely confirmation of your 10 HTLCs. So it will the fee computing function will take these parameters as inputs, and it will calculate what amount of fee from the budget needs to be paid to ensure timely confirmation of the HTLCs. It might be n by 2, it might be n by 3, might be n by 4, might be n as the whole, but the upper threshold is n. So it'll start with a minimum relay fee, for instance, and see if it can get all of your pending HTLCs confirmed. If it cannot, then it'll increase, and this might happen by querying an external feerate estimator, and then they might exponentially increase it. They might exponentially increase it till they either end up confirm getting the pending HTLCs confirmed, or they exhaust the entire budget. So this is how, like, both of these mechanisms, querying of external fee rate estimators and exponential fee bumping, are clubbed. And by batching, what you can do is you can save on your fee, because since you've batched all the transactions and you've batched all the sum, since you've batched all the transactions and you've added up the sum of each individual HTLC, you might end up saving on the fee as well. And at the same time, you can use both of these mechanisms, querying external fee rate estimators and exponential fee bumping, right? He additionally describes how the new logic helps protect against replacement cycling attacks, concluding with LND's default parameters as an attack must generally spend at least 20x the value of the HTLC to successfully carry out a replacement cycling attack. He adds that the new system also improves LND's defense against spinning attacks. He concludes with a link-filled summary of several LND-specific bug and vulnerability fixes made through the improved logic. Abu Bakr Sadiq Ismail replied with some suggestions for how all LN implementations, in addition to other software, can more effectively use Bitcoin post-fee estimation. Several other developers also commented, adding both nuance to the description and praise for the new approach. Okay, so now we saw how this sweeper mechanism, or that LND has proposed for fiat estimation of pre-signed contracts. It utilizes both the mechanisms, querying external fiat estimators as well as exponentially incrementing the fee rate, and how it batches the transactions, the pending HTLCs, and how it batches the sum of each individual HTLC. Now, what are the benefits of this? Some of them we've already discussed. The two other benefits that the proposal highlights is one, replacement cycling attacks, and two, pinning attacks. I'm assuming most of us know what pinning attacks are. Without going into the intricacies of this, it just it makes replacement cycling and pinning attacks more difficult. It makes replacement cycling and pinning attacks more difficult. Okay, so before we understand how it makes them more difficult, let's just chime over what a replacement cycling attack is and what a pinning attack is, right? I'm assuming most of us here know what a pinning attack is. It's something that we have discussed in detail in preceding sessions. If I had to just read over it, let's just read over it what a pinning attack is. Do you want to read it? It's not big. We can read it. So transaction pinning is a method for making fee bumping prohibitively expensive by abusing node protections against attacks that can waste bandwidth, CPU, and memory. This can make fee management more difficult in multi-party contract protocols. Nodes such as Bitcoin Core that allow transactions to be replaced or packaged with a higher fee child transaction, CPFP, place restrictions on those replacements in order to prevent various loss attacks. However, when two or more people each have the ability to fee bump a transaction, this makes it possible for one of them to pin their version of a transaction at one of the limits and prevent other participants from using fee bumping. Right? So, what's a pinning attack in small? The commitment transaction in the Lightning Network has two versions, right? A Lightning channel is between Alice and Bob, let's assume. So Alice has her own version of commitment transaction, and Bob has his own version of commitment transaction. There is slight difference between how these commitment transactions are architectured, even though the amount that both the commitment transactions pay to the beneficiaries is the same, but the mechanism in which these amounts are redeemed, quote unquote, are different. The mechanism in which in these funds are redeemed is different, right? We won't go into the details of that. You'll probably find it in the book titled Mastering the Lightning Network. So, what can happen is that if one participant in a lightning channel wants to unilaterally exit that lightning channel, they can broadcast their version of the commitment transaction. However, the counterparty can prevent them from getting the commitment transaction mined by pinning it. Right? So Alice has her own version of commitment transaction. Bob has his own version of commitment transaction. If Alice unilaterally wants to exit the lightning channel, Alice can broadcast her commitment transaction. However, if Bob wants to pull off a griefing attack, what Bob can do is Bob can broadcast his version of the commitment transaction by paying a higher fee. Now, the mempool is finite, right? We know the mempool is finite. Uh, it's around 300 MB. The default value for the mempool of Bitcoin Core is 300 MB. So the mempool has finite value. It can only accommodate a certain set of transactions, right? And which transactions enter the mempool? Usually, most miners configure their mempools such that the transactions that pay them the highest fee enter the mempool. So if Alice is broadcasting her version of the commitment transaction and Bob is broadcasting his version of the commitment transaction, then there's only one commitment transaction that the miner can accommodate in their mempool. And the miner will, in most cases, accommodate the transaction that pays the higher fee. What Bob can do is Bob can pin Alice's commitment transaction by paying a low fee rate but a high total fee. A low fee rate but a high total fee. Now, if Alice wants to replace Bob's transaction and get her version of the commitment transaction uh, into the mempool, Alice will have to pay not only a higher fee rate but also a higher cumulative fee. So what Bob can do is Bob can pin Alice's version of the commitment transaction, and Alice will not be able to get her version of the commitment transaction confirmed until and unless either some miner chooses to mine Bob's version of the commitment transaction, or Alice has to pay a higher fee, or Alice has to pay a higher fee. Thereby, Bob can prevent Alice from exiting a lightning channel unilaterally and might also steal her funds. There is a version of pinning attack which the counterparty might even end up not stealing your funds, but you might end up losing your funds, right? So this is what a pinning attack is basically. When in context of the Lightning Network, when there are two counterparties, one wants to unilaterally exit the Lightning Network and they broadcast their commitment transaction, the counterparty can broadcast their version of the commitment transaction that pays a higher fee, that pays a lower fee rate but a higher cumulative fee, thereby preventing one of the members of the Lightning channel from exiting the contract uh, without either paying a higher fee or delaying their exit, right? That's what a pinning attack is. So this sweeper mechanism or the sweeper method of calculating or period estimation that LND talks about, it does not prevent, but it diminishes or it makes these pinning attacks much more expensive. And the other attack that it makes more expensive as it claims 20x is the replacement cycling attack. Let's just see what the replacement cycling attack is. Is there anything in the chat? I hope I'm audible. Okay, there's something in the chat. For fee bumping using RBF, do both parties have to agree? In that case, can't we just create new settlement transaction with correct fee? So to answer that question, for fee bumping using RBF, no, both parties don't have to agree because you have an anchor output, right? We have an anchor output and each commitment transaction has a unique anchor output. So you need to add a child to that anchor output, or you can replace that anchor output with another anchor output that pays a higher fee. And can't we just create a new settlement transaction? Yes, we can. But we are discussing about a situation where one party wants to unilaterally exit. If both the parties want to happily move out, then it's all well and good, right? They can just exit whenever they want. But we are talking about a situation where one person wants to unilaterally exit and the other person does not want to unilaterally exit. Either they are absent or they are not cooperating, or they are trying to pin you, or they are trying to pull off a replacement cycling attack. They are trying to grief you. Okay, so this scenario is where your counterparty is trying to grief you either by a pinning attack or by a replacement cycle attack, right? So both the parties are not on common terms. If Alice wants to exit the contract, then Bob does not want to exit the contract. In fact, Bob is trying to pin Alice's transaction or is trying to pull off a replacement cycling attack, right? So we're talking about this situation. So this mechanism, this cheaper mechanism of field estimation prevents you from or makes it more difficult and expensive for the counterparty to pull off griefing attacks. If somebody wants to pin you or somebody wants to pull off a replacement cycling attack on you, they have to pay 20x more fee. If both the parties want to amicably settle the commitment transaction, then pinning attack and replacement cycle attack, it doesn't come into the picture. Then they can just create a new settlement transaction altogether. They can do it by any way. They can do it by RVF. They can do it by CPFP. They can do it by adding that CPFP, adding a child to that anchor output. They can do it in any way, shape, or form that they want. Here we are talking about, or we specifically dealing with griefing attacks. So typing something. I'll have another sip of monster in the meanwhile. All right, great. Okay, we'll go back to the screen. What's a replacement cycling attack? Okay, so this is very cool. I find this very cool. A lot of time when you read a lot of things in Bitcoin, it's just like playing chess. There's game theory in play all the time. And if any of you want to pursue a career in Bitcoin as a Bitcoin developer, you have to inculcate adversarial thinking. It's like always a cat and mouse race. It's always a cop and thief race. Like the cop always has to be one step ahead of the thief, right? The mice, if the mice wants to live, he always has to be one step ahead of the cat. He has to know what the cat's next move could be, right? And he has to be ready. So the cop needs to know what the thief's next move could be. And it's exactly like that. Being a Bitcoin developer, you always need to know what the attacker will think like, right? And you always need to be one step ahead of the attacker and combat their moves. So let's just read through this. We'll probably consume, let's say, 7 to 8 minutes with this, and at 8:45, 8:50, we'll move on to the next newsletter and probably cover one article from that, and we'll wind up then. So what's a replacement cycling attack? A replacement cycling is an attack against CPFP key bumps and transactions using SIG-hash single that allows an attacker to remove an unconfirmed transaction from the mempools of relaying full nodes without leaving an alternative transaction in its place. It mainly affects multi-party transactions that depend on CPFP fee bumps, such as those used in LN. Okay, let's just read through it first. So let's say Mallory and Bob may share funds as in an LN channel. Let's assume there's a lightning channel between Mallory and Bob. Each of them has a unilateral exit transaction, right? As we have discussed that there are two versions of the commitment transactions. Each party in the lightning network has its own version of the commitment transaction. The amount of sats that the beneficiaries get is the same. It's just the settlement mechanism is different. It's just how the time locks are triggered is different, right? If Mallory broadcasts a commitment transaction, then she will have to wait for to receive her funds, and Bob can claim his funds immediately. And if Bob broadcasts his version of the commitment transaction, then Bob will have to wait to receive his funds. Mallory can claim her funds immediately. So it's just that time lock transactions, or the time lock is configured differently. That's the difference between the two versions of the commitment transactions. Whoever broadcasts their share of the sats is time locked. That they can publish on chain at any time to terminate the fund sharing arrangement. To allow either of them to fee bump the transaction, it contains at least one output each of them can spend in a child transaction for a CPFP fee bump, right? So both of them have their own version of the commitment transaction, and both of them have an anchor output. Both of them have an anchor output, right? Its only purpose is to enable a child that pays fee for that anchor output. The anchor output has an OpCSV code attached to it. So until and unless the anchor output is not mined, the other outputs cannot get mined. So moving forward, if Bob wants to terminate the fund sharing, he can broadcast his unilateral exit along with a child transaction for the CPFP fee bump, right? So for in our example, Mallory and Bob have share a lightning channel. Both of them have their own version of the commitment transaction. Both of them have an anchor output in their commitment transaction. And let's assume Bob wants to unilaterally terminate this transaction. What can Bob do? Bob can attach a child to the anchor output of their commitment transaction and CPFP it, right? Mallory has the ability to broadcast her own unilateral exit transaction with a higher fee child transaction, right? So now what Mallory can do is Mallory has her own version of the commitment transaction. Mallory can also attach a child to her anchor output, paying a fee which is higher than what Bob is paying, right? So now Bob and Mallory's transactions are competing, right? Because he has the same transactions, two transactions that share even one single common input cannot exist in the mempool at the same time. If one enters, the other goes out, right? So two conflicting transactions can never exist in the mempool at the same time. If one enters, the other has to go out. So either Bob's transaction goes out or Mallory's transaction goes out because they're basically the same transactions, right? They share common inputs. So in our example, Mallory is paying a higher fee. So what will happen? Bob's transaction will get kicked out of the mempool. Because the two exit transactions spend the same inputs, they conflict, and Bob's lower fee exit transaction will be replaced in mempools with Mallory's higher fee alternative. That's fine for Bob. In the protocol, he doesn't care which exit transaction gets confirmed. Either transaction will end the fund sharing arrangement, right? So it doesn't matter to Bob in our example whether his version of the commitment transaction gets confirmed or Mallory's version of the commitment transaction gets confirmed. Bob just wants to exit this contract. Bob just wants to settle the funds in the Lightning channel on the mainnet. It doesn't matter to Bob whether Bob's version of the commitment transaction gets confirmed or Mallory's version of the commitment gets confirmed. Either way, Bob gets to opt out of the of this Lightning contract. However, after Mallory's alternative exit transaction has entered mempools, she can replace her child transaction with another conflicting transaction. This one with no relationship to either exit transaction. This replacement removes Mallory's alternative transaction, leaving the mempool devoid of any transaction that terminates the fund sharing arrangement, right? So there is a catch. Now listen to this carefully, right? Initially, Bob and Mallory have a Lightning channel. Bob wants to unilaterally exit this Lightning channel. So Bob broadcasted his version of the commitment transaction. If Bob's version of the commitment transaction gets casted and gets mined, then Bob gets to exit the Lightning channel. What Mallory does is Mallory broadcasts her version of the commitment transaction with a fee that is higher than what Bob has paid. Now, these are two conflicting transactions having common inputs. Because Mallory's version of the commitment transaction is paying a higher fee, the miners will give preference to Mallory's transaction. And since conflicting transactions cannot exist in the mempool simultaneously, when Mallory's transaction enters the mempool, Bob's transaction will exit the mempool, right? Does this matter to Bob? Does this grieve Bob? Does this harm Bob in any way, shape, or form? Thus far, no, it doesn't. Because whether Bob's commitment transaction gets confirmed or Mallory's commitment transaction gets confirmed, the purpose is served. The Lightning channel is aborted, right? However, there's a catch. Now that we are at a stage where Bob's transaction gets kicked out of the mempool and Mallory's transaction is in the mempool, what Mallory will do is that we know that Mallory has attached a child to the commitment transaction, right? Because as we have discussed in the session, at the advent of the session, that usually you need to bump the fee to get your commitment transaction confirmed because they're pre-signed transactions. You can't accurately predict the fee, right? So you bump the fee. Now, how do you bump the fee? By attaching a child. So Mallory has attached a child to the commitment transaction, to her version of the commitment transaction, which is bumping the fee. Okay, so far well and good. Now what Mallory will do is Mallory will broadcast another transaction, completely unrelated transaction, which conflicts with her child. Okay, with the child of a commitment transaction. So Mallory has a commitment transaction in the mempool which has a child attached to it, which is bumping the fee of the commitment transaction. Now Mallory will broadcast another transaction, a completely unrelated transaction, which conflicts with the child of the commitment transaction that Mallory has already in the mempool. What will happen now? Now either the child of the commitment transaction can exist in the mempool, or the completely unrelated transaction that Mallory has just broadcasted, it will exist because these are two conflicting transactions. What Mallory will do is Mallory will broadcast this completely unrelated transaction that conflicts with the child of the commitment transaction with a higher fee. What will that do? That will replace the child of the commitment transaction that Mallory has in the mempool. Now that Mallory's commitment transaction's child is no longer in the mempool, the entire transaction will be kicked out of the mempool, or it will be languishing in the mempool and will not get included in the block because it's paying a very low fee, thereby preventing Bob from exiting the Lightning channel, right? So, stage one, Bob broadcasts his version of the commitment transaction. Bob attaches a child to his commitment transaction, broadcasts the commitment transaction along with the child. The commitment transaction along with the child gets included in the mempool. This is stage one. Stage two, Mallory wants to prevent Bob from exiting the transaction. Mallory will now broadcast her own version of the commitment transaction by attaching a child to it, which pays the fee higher than the Bob's commitment transaction is paying, right? This is stage two. Now we have two conflicting transactions: Mallory's commitment transaction with the child and Bob's commitment transaction with the child. Since Mallory is paying a higher fee, Mallory's commitment transaction with the child will kick out Bob's commitment transaction with the child because these are conflicting transactions, right? So now we're at stage three, where in the mempool we have Mallory's version of the commitment transaction along with the child, right? Stage four, Mallory will broadcast a completely unrelated transaction, but that transaction will share its inputs with the child of her commitment transaction. Now, again, we have a situation where two transactions are competing with each other to enter the mempool. First is Mallory, the child of Mallory's commitment transaction. Second is the unrelated transaction that Mallory has just broadcasted, right? Since the unrelated transaction that Mallory has just casted is paying a higher fee, this transaction will kick out the child transaction of Mallory's commitment transaction from the mempool, right? And now we have Mallory's commitment transaction in the mempool without the child. So the transaction will either get kicked out of the mempool or it will keep languishing in the mempool and it will not be included in the block, thereby preventing Bob from unilaterally exiting the lightning channel, right? What Bob can do is Bob can either wait till Mallory's commitment transaction till some minor obliges and Mallory's commitment transaction gets included into the block, and that has to happen before the hash time lock contract expires, right? Or the second option is that Bob will have to increment the fee, so Mallory will force Bob to pay more fee, right? So this is a griefing attack. Like Mallory basically doesn't gain anything. She can just delay Bob's exit from the contract or make Bob pay an extra fee. So that's what a replacement cycling attack is. It's illustrated very well in this example, right? So Bob exit, replacement cycle, step on Bob broadcast, right? So Bob wants to unilaterally exit the Lightning channel. So Bob CPFP fee bumps his commitment transaction and broadcasts it. This is step one, right? Then step two, Mallory's alternative. Mallory also has her version of the commitment transaction. She also attaches a child, which pays a higher fee than the child of Bob and broadcasts it now. So now what happens? These two transactions are competing with each other. The one on the top, Bob's commitment transaction, and then one on the bottom, Mallory's commitment transaction. Since Mallory is paying higher fee, this one will get kicked out of the mempool and this will get included in the mempool, right? Now Mallory broadcasts another transaction. This is step three, completely unrelated transaction. However, this UTXO that Mallory is broadcasting, it shares its inputs with this one, this child, the child, right? What will happen now? There is a child in the mempool and this UTXO that is trying to enter the mempool. Now, again, we have a conflicting transaction. But since this transaction that Mallory has broadcasted is paying a higher fee than the child, this child will get kicked out. So step one, Bob's commitment transaction gets kicked out. Step two, Mallory's commitment transaction also gets kicked out, right? So Mallory prevents Bob from exiting the Lightning channel by not allowing Bob to get his commitment transaction confirmed. And when Mallory's commitment transaction is on the verge of getting confirmed, she gets her own commitment transaction replaced as well. That's how she prevents Bob from exiting the Lightning channel. Bob can broadcast his exact same exit transaction as signed transaction from before, but Mallory can repeat the sequence of steps to remove his transaction from mempools. Although she need to use different UTXO or pay a higher fee rate to reuse the same input each time, the cycle of Bob rebroadcasting and Mallory removing is what presumably gives replacement cycling its name, right? So Bob obviously can broadcast its commitment transaction again, but then Mallory can broadcast her commitment transaction again, and then Mallory can replace her commitment transaction again. Then Bob can increment the fee and again broadcast the transaction. Then Mallory can keep on doing this, right? That's why it's called the replacement cycling attack, because every time Bob broadcasts his commitment transaction and it gets included in the mempool, Mallory replaces her version of the commitment transaction with Bob's version of the commitment transaction, and then Mallory replaces her own version of the commitment transaction with an ordinary spend, meaning a completely unrelated transaction, right? So that's where the name replacement cycle attack comes from. Mallory just keeps on replacing every single transaction that can ensure that Bob exits the Lightning channel. And the only alternative is to like either situation could be like Mallory pays like some minor mines Mallory's transaction before she manages to replace it, or Bob pays a very high fee above which Mallory is not willing to go, right? So there can be two situations. through which Bob exits the Lightning channel. Situation one could be that some miner mines Mallory's transaction, commitment transaction, before she replaces it, or Bob pays such an exponential fee that Mallory is not willing to outbid that. That's a replacement cycling attack, right? So we covered what a pinning attack is, what a replacement cycling attack is. We talked about the mechanisms that different Lightning clients implement to fee bump, and we saw how this sweeper proposal made by LND aggregates both of these mechanisms and selects the budgets for the fee estimation for timely confirmation of the hash time like contracts in the Lightning channel, and how this mechanism, the sweeper mechanism, exponentially diminishes the chances of replacement cycling attacks and pinning attacks, as they have mentioned by the study that it at least like somebody who's trying to pull off a replacement cycling attack, Mallory will have to pay at least 20x of the value of the HTLC to successfully carry out a replacement cycling attack. So whatever is the HTLC of the commitment transaction, Mallory will have to pay 20 times of that to successfully pull off a replacement cycling attack. So this was the news article that usurped the chunk of our time discussing LND's dynamic fee rate adjustment, in which we saw what are the mechanisms that Lightning clients deploy to estimate fee for timely confirmations of pre-signed contracts. We saw how Sweeper aggregates both of these mechanisms and how it inculcates batch transactions. We saw what a replacement cycling attack is. We saw what a pinning attack is, and we saw how we tried to understand how this sweeper fee rate adjustment mechanism mitigates or exponentially diminishes the chances or makes it much more expensive for attackers to pull off a replacement cycling attack or a pinning attack, right? I'll just take a break for a minute and we want to discuss something here. Okay, we'll probably take this one and then we'll move on to the next newsletter and we'll talk about that newsletter. Probably we'll take one article and give 5 minutes to it, and hopefully by 9:05 maximum, because we started at 8:05. By 9:05, we'll wind up the session. And if anybody has anything to say or share, then please feel free to unmute yourself and talk or type in the chat. All right, I'm back, guys. Thanks for being patient. We'll just go through these. Uh, we'll go through the first two in code and documentation changes. I think both of them have to do with Bitcoin Core. Let's see what the first one is. Bitcoin Core PR 31649 removes all checkpoint logic, which is no longer necessary following the headers precinct step implemented years ago. That enables a node during initial block download to determine if a chain of headers is valid by comparing its total proof of work TOW to a predefined threshold and minimum chain work. Only chains with a total proof of work exceeding this value are considered valid and stored, effectively preventing memory DOS attacks from low work headers. This eliminates the need for checkpoints, which were often seen as a centralized element. I'm sure most people here know what checkpoints are. So previously we had these benchmarks uh, in Bitcoin Core, which were known as checkpoints, right? So if any of you run your own node, all of you should do, and all of us should do, we know that when we bootstrap a Bitcoin node, we sync up to the active chain tip. We sync up to the active chain tip, starting from the Genesis block to the latest block. We download the entire block history, right? To be sure that our node is connected with honest peers and they are sharing a correct and appropriate information with our node, checkpoints were implemented at places. These checkpoints were hard coded. These checkpoints were hard coded by Bitcoin Core developers. So when your node is syncing, it starts from the Genesis block and it then syncs up to the second block, third block, fourth block, fifth block, right? At regular intervals, it'll come across checkpoints. Those checkpoints, like the hash of the header of those checkpoints is hard coded in Bitcoin Core. So when your node, while it is syncing, when it reaches that threshold, that checkpoint, let's say the first checkpoint is at, I'm just giving a random number, at block number 5,000, let's say. Okay. So your node starts bootstrapping, it starts syncing, it starts with the Genesis block, it goes on to the second, third, 100, 200, it reaches 5,000 blocks. Now, let's say 5,000th block is the first checkpoint. There is a hard coded value in Bitcoin Core that mentions the hash of the header of that block. In our case, let's assume 5,000. When your node will compare the hash of the header of the block that your peer is sending to you with that hard coded value. And if it matches, then your node will be sure that up till now the blocks that it has sunk with are honest, are legitimate blocks, and the peers are honest peers, right? And then the next checkpoint, let's say, is at 15,000, at 30,000, 50,000, right? So I mean, this happens even when you're driving a car and you're moving place to the other. There are checkpoints, right? If you're going from place A to place B, at regular intervals, you'll find checkpoints, right? That'll say that place B in 40 kilometers, place B in 30 kilometers, place B in 10 kilometers, so that the traveler is sure that they're traveling on the right path and they will reach the destination if they continue on this path. They have not lost track. So it's pretty analogous to that. When you're syncing up uh, your node, you have to be sure that you are in touch with the or you are syncing the right blockchain, you're on the right track. So that is why these checkpoints were implemented. However, these checkpoints had some level of centralization. Like some people might even dispute that because it's like common knowledge. It's like nobody can manipulate it. Like if you are technically competent enough, then the software is reviewed by hundreds and thousands of people, so it's common knowledge. But still, at the end of the day, it was a hard coded value. Now it's been done away with. This mechanism, checkpoints, has been done away with. Now what happens is that before downloading all the entire blockchain, your node only downloads the headers, which is known as the headers precinct. Okay, and it will check that the headers that you are downloading have adequate proof of work or no. If the headers that you are downloading have adequate proof of work, then you're downloading the right headers. If the headers that you're downloading do not have adequate proof of work, then you're not downloading the right chain. Once you've downloaded all the headers to the active chain tip, and you know that every single header has adequate amount of proof of work, you know that you have downloaded the headers from the right chain. Once you have the right headers, then you can find the corresponding blocks. You can find corresponding blocks to those headers, right? So we don't use checkpoints anymore in Bitcoin Core. The even the logic of implementing and execute checkpoint is now being done away with. It's redundant now. Now, the sole mechanism through which a Bitcoin core node determines whether it is syncing the right blockchain or no is it first downloads all the headers, and it ensures that every single header that it downloads has adequate proof of work, thereby ensuring that it's downloading the right headers. Once it has downloaded the right headers, it downloads the blocks that are corresponding to those headers, right? So that is what this PR does. Let's read the second one. Bitcoin Core introduces a new wait next method to the block template interface, which will only return a new template if the chain tip changes or the mempool fees increased above the max money threshold. Previously, miners would receive a new template with every request, resulting in unnecessary template generation. This change aligns with the Stratum V2 protocol specification. If any of your home miners and if any of you create your own templates, and if any of you have checked your logs, you'll see that your node will constantly create new templates. Like every second, every few seconds, your node will constantly create new templates, right? What this PR does is that your node will not constantly create new templates. It will only create templates in certain edge cases. When it create templates, when the active chain type changes, meaning you're creating a template, a candidate block, and you're mining it. If somebody else finds a block, then obviously you need to create a new template because there's a high possibility that the transactions that you have in your existing template are already mined. So you do not want to hash those transactions, right? Because it's just waste of computational power and mining resources. So you want to ensure that the transactions that are already mined are part of a candidate block, and in that situation, it becomes essential for you to create your own template. The second situation would be when the mempool fee increases above the max money, right? When the fee that you are willing to pay, when the mempool's average fee rate increases above that, then you need to create a new template because you need to add more fee. So now it'll only, this is, I believe, specific to Stratum V2. It'll only create a new template for you. A, when a new block is found and the active chain tip moves forward. B, when the fee rate increases such that it surpasses the max money variable. Only in these situations, your miner will be fed with a new template by your node if you're creating your own templates, right? With that, we're done with you said a 346 in 5 minutes. Let's just see if we can cover one article from 345 so that I stand true to my word of covering two newsletters. Let's read through this P2P traffic analysis, and let's try and wind it up in 5 minutes. P2P. So this is Optech newsletter number 345. The preceding one published on March 14, 2025. We'll go through the first news article. That's P2P traffic analysis. Developer Virtu posted to Delving Bitcoin an analysis of the network traffic generated and received by his node in four different modes: initial block download, non-listening, outbound connections only, non-archival pruned listening, and archival listening. Although the results for a single node may not have been representative of, in all cases, he found several of his discoveries to be interesting, right? So our developer monitored the P2P traffic analysis by deploying different nodes, right? They ran four different types of nodes, and they did a study on the P2P traffic analysis. The first was what? IBD. So the node was in four different modes. The first was initial block download. The second was non-listening node. Non-listening node means no inbound connections, only outbound connections. Then non-archival listening nodes, meaning this node has inbound and outbound connections both, but it's pruned node. It does not have the entire blockchain. And the third was archival listening, right? So this is this form of node is like the node that requires the maximum amount of resources, okay, because it downloads and validates the entire blockchain, and it caters to both inbound and outbound connections. So these are the four different nodes that the developer ran and performed a P2P traffic analysis. So what were their inferences or their observations? The first, when they were running an high block traffic as an archival listening node, So sorry. First, we'll talk about the archival listening node. This is when your node downloads the entire blockchain and it caters to both inbound and outbound connections. So high block traffic as an archival node. Virtu's node serves several gigabytes of blocks each hour to other nodes when operating as a non-pruned listening node. Many of the blocks were older blocks being requested by incoming connections so that they could perform IBD. So when they ran their node as an archival listening node, they were serving gigabytes and gigabytes of data to peers. Because when you have an archival listening node, then all of your peers who are doing the IBD will obviously reach out to you for each and every transaction from the Genesis block till the chain tip. That's like 800 gigabytes. So their node was broadcasting or relaying data worth gigabytes and gigabytes, thereby catering the needs of nodes that were bootstrapping themselves. This was the first observation that they made when they were running an archival listening node. So if any of you are running an archive, you will have to invest computational power, that is bandwidth of lots and lots of gigabytes every day to cater the needs of your peers that are bootstrapping their nodes. High INV traffic as a non-archival listener. Okay. When they were a non-archival node, meaning they were a pruned node, but they cater to both inbound and outbound connections. So they don't have the entire blockchain, but whatever information they have, they are sending or sharing it with the inbound and outbound connections. About 20% of the total node traffic was INV messages, right? So these were new IND messages are generally new transactions, right? So when you hear of a transaction, you share it with your peers. You might not have the entire blockchain history as a true node, but you have the latest transactions in most cases. So when your node becomes aware of a new transaction and it validates those new transactions, it gossips those transactions with its peers in the form of INV messages. We covered this in either the last session, or I think last to last session, right? So 20% of the traffic of a non-archival listener node was in sharing INV messages, and 20% of and this can be reduced exponentially. That okay, this was like 100 MB a day, and this can be reduced exponentially by OLE. We've talked about what OLE is in preceding sessions, right? It basically reduces the bandwidth consumption by only relaying individual transactions with your outbound connections and doing timely syncing of the mempools with your inbound connections. So this is the observation of the developer when they were running a non-archival listener node. Bulk of inbound peers appear to be spy nodes. Interestingly, the bulk of inbound peers exchange only around 1 MB of traffic with my node, which is too low. So the developer observed that a lot of peers are only exchanging 1 MB of traffic with their node, which is very, very low, right? Because if you want to exchange genuine information, IMV messages, or if you want to serve blocks to nodes that are bootstrapping, this is usually 100 MB or maybe even gigabytes, right? So if a peer is exchanging only 1 MB of traffic with you, then there is a possibility that this is a spy node, right? They're not interested in exchanging actual information with you. They are just establishing a connection with you to spy on you. which is too low, using traffic via my outbound connections as baseline for them to be regular connections. All those nodes do is complete the P2P handshake and politely reply to ping messages. Other than that, they just suck up our INV messages, right? So a lot of connections were INV message were spying nodes with just established connections with their node as peers in a P2P handshake, and they just reply to ping messages. Ping messages are messages that you exchange with the peers to ensure that they are alive. Well, if they are still online, right? You send a ping message, then they send a pong message, then you know that they are still alive. These connections are still alive. If they don't reply to the pong message, then you would want to flush them out of your out of your peer list because they're not active anymore. So these are some observations made by this developer when they were running the node in three different formats. Okay, you can read this in more detail, and also you can go through the entire newsletter. And if any topic interests you, I wanted to cover the PR review club as well, but the time will not permit us. So you can do it on your own. If you have any questions, any queries pertaining to newsletter 345 and 346, please feel free to post on Discord or DM me or other TAs, other admins will be more than happy to help you. That's all we had to share with you or we had to discuss in this session. With that, I will stop sharing my screen. And if anybody has anything to share or talk about, whether related to the newsletter or something else, I'm here. And if nothing, then we can sign off. And thank you for showing up. Thanks.